When we talk about discipline, when we talk about purpose, when we talk about the journey of the believer, everything begins with one fundamental truth, recognizing who Allah is. Because if you don't truly know who your Lord is, you will never understand why you were created. You will never find the strength to stay consistent, and you will never develop the discipline that faith demands. Discipline without awareness of Allah becomes hollow, mechanical, and temporary. But when discipline is rooted in recognizing that Allah is the King of all creation, it becomes worship, it becomes a declaration that your life belongs to Him. You see, everything around us, from the stars suspended in galaxies to the smallest grain of sand beneath your feet, all operate under the divine command of Allah. Every creature, every heartbeat, every wave in the ocean follows a pattern decreed by the King Himself. The sun rises not because of science alone, but because Allah commands it to. The wind blows by His will, the rain falls by His mercy, and yet human beings, the ones given intellect, heart, and will, are the only creation that sometimes forgets who truly rules them. That forgetfulness is where undiscipline begins. When a person forgets that Allah is the King above all kings, they start living as if they are their own master. They begin to prioritize their comfort, their desires, their plans, and their timing over the plan of the one who gave them life. The arrogance of the self starts whispering, "I'll pray when I have time. I'll change when I'm ready. I'll fix myself later." But you see, later is not guaranteed. The King does not owe us tomorrow. Every moment you are given is an invitation from Him, an opportunity to return, to realign, to remember who you are serving. Think for a moment about what it means that Allah is *al-Malik*, the absolute King. He owns the heavens and the earth. He owns you, your wealth, your youth, your health, your success, even your failures. Everything you have ever achieved or lost was written by Him. Nothing happens outside His decree. When this reality settles into your heart, it humbles you. It silences your complaints and replaces them with gratitude. It takes away fear, because how can you fear what the King already controls? It removes pride, because how can you boast over what the King merely lent you for a short while? True recognition of Allah's kingship doesn't just inspire awe, it transforms behavior. When you know you live under His dominion, you begin to carry yourself differently. You speak with more care. You act with more sincerity. You worship not because someone told you to, but because your heart trembles in front of Majesty. That's the beginning of real discipline, when the awareness of Allah becomes stronger than the pull of your desires. Look at how the angels live. They never disobey Allah for even a heartbeat. Their existence is pure discipline, not because they are forced, but because they know who their Lord is. They glorify Him without rest, not out of compulsion, but out of love. And yet, we, who have been given free will, often waste our days chasing temporary crowns, wealth, fame, validation, while forgetting that the real King already sees us, already values us, already calls us His servants. What greater honor could there be when a person internalizes the majesty of Allah? Something shifts inside them. Life stops being random. Struggles stop feeling meaningless. You begin to see your tests as divine training, your delays as hidden mercy, your failures as reminders to return to the source. Because the King of all creation does not allow pain without purpose. He does not waste your tears. Every hardship you face is meant to polish your heart, to discipline your soul, to prepare you for closeness to Him. Discipline then becomes not a burden, but a form of worship. When you pray on time, when you resist temptation, when you guard your eyes, when you control your anger, you're not just being good. You're honoring the King. You're saying, "My time belongs to you. My body belongs to you. My life belongs to you." That is what transforms the ordinary believer into someone extraordinary. Their heart beats for the King, not for the world. But the tragedy of modern life is that we live as if Allah is absent while chasing worldly kings who promise us nothing but illusion. People will exhaust themselves for a paycheck, a promotion, or applause, but struggle to wake up for Fajr, the meeting with the true king. Why? Because the heart is distracted. The heart has forgotten where real power resides. The one who truly knows Allah never bows to anyone else. They may walk among creation, but their heart remains in prostration before the Creator. This awareness is what gives birth to discipline. You stop wasting your energy on things that don't serve your purpose. You begin to protect your time as a trust. You start speaking less and reflecting more. You take accountability for your choices. Because you realize every second is a gift from the King, every action is recorded by His command, and every heartbeat is moving you closer to the day you stand before Him. How can you remain careless knowing that the King is watching, not to punish, but to see how much you truly love Him? If you truly recognized Allah as the King of all creation, you would never delay your repentance. You would never underestimate your prayer. You would never think small of your efforts, because the King accepts every sincere act, no matter how hidden it is. You would no longer ask, "What's in it for me?" You would ask, "Will this please my King?" That question alone disciplines your entire life. Even your perspective on success changes. The King's definition of success is not how much you achieve, but how pure your intention remains while striving. The King's definition of strength is not how loud you are, but how much you restrain your ego. The King's definition of victory is not worldly applause, but divine acceptance. And once you align your heart with His definitions, you begin to live with serenity no matter what the world thinks of you. Everything around you is already submitting to Him. The trees, the mountains, the rivers, the stars all glorify Him in ways we cannot comprehend. The universe runs with perfect discipline because it follows His command. Only the human being has been given the choice to submit or to rebel. When you choose submission, you join the harmony of creation itself. You stop fighting against divine order and start flowing within it. That's where peace comes from, not from control, but from surrender. Recognizing Allah's kingship is not just about believing He exists. It's about living like you believe it. It's about letting that belief guide how you speak, how you act, how you plan, and how you dream. It's about waking up every morning with a sense of reverence, knowing that the same King who holds galaxies together also listens when you whisper His name. How can you not give your best to a Lord so generous, so merciful, so majestic? The truth is, undiscipline comes when the heart forgets the King. When remembrance fades, desires take the throne. But the moment you place Allah back where He belongs at the center of your life, your chaos begins to fade, your priorities become clear, your soul begins to rest. That is the power of recognizing the King of all creation. It doesn't just change how you worship, it changes how you live. When you stand before Allah, when you recite His words, when you raise your hands in dua, remind yourself you are not standing before just any power. You are standing before the one who said *be*, and it became. You are standing before the owner of every moment you will ever live. So live each one with dignity, humility, and purpose, because the King deserves nothing less than your absolute best. When you truly reflect on why Allah created you, something inside begins to awaken. You realize that you are not here by accident, you are not a mistake, and your existence is not random. You were created with purpose. You were designed by the King of all creation for something greater than comfort, greater than pleasure, greater than this fleeting world. Every breath you take has meaning because it was willed by Allah. Every moment of your life, every challenge, every opportunity is part of a divine script written specifically for you. When this realization settles in your heart, you stop living carelessly. You stop waking up each morning without direction. You begin to understand that life itself is an amana, a trust, and that trust demands discipline. The tragedy of our time is that people are living without purpose, yet expecting peace. They chase distractions, they pursue what feels good instead of what is right, and they wonder why they feel empty. The truth is, emptiness is not from the lack of entertainment, it's from the lack of purpose. Because when the heart forgets why it was created, it starts searching for meaning in the wrong places. You can surround yourself with luxury, You can drown yourself in noise, but until your heart reconnects with its creator, you will never feel at home. Allah tells us in the Quran that He did not create us in vain, that our existence is not meaningless. He placed within us a mission to worship Him, to live by His guidance, to bring good into the world. Worship doesn't only mean prayer and fasting, it means living every moment with intention. It means that your work, your studies, your family, your words, even your silence, all of it can become worship if it's done with sincerity for the sake of Allah. When you understand that, discipline no longer feels like a burden. It becomes the natural result of knowing your purpose. Think about it: when someone has a clear goal, they don't waste their time. An athlete who dreams of the championship doesn't sleep through training. A student who wants to graduate with honor doesn't skip classes. A believer who knows their life is a test doesn't drift aimlessly. They prepare, they plan, they sacrifice, because they know what's at stake. And for the believer, what's at stake is Jannah. What's at stake is Allah's pleasure. What's at stake is eternal peace. Once you realize that, laziness begins to disappear. You begin to move with clarity and strength because you finally understand. My life is not about surviving, it's about serving. But the modern world constantly tells you the opposite. It whispers, do what feels good. Follow your heart. Don't push yourself too hard. Yet that same world celebrates those who discipline themselves for worldly goals: athletes, entrepreneurs, actors. We admire their commitment, their drive, their sacrifices. And yet, when it comes to serving the King of all creation, we say, it's too hard, I'm too tired, maybe tomorrow. How can we give our full energy to temporary pursuits, and then give excuses to the one who gave us that energy in the first place? How can we chase careers and fame with discipline, but fail to give our Salah the same respect? This contradiction is not a time problem, it's a purpose problem. When purpose lives in your heart, discipline follows naturally. You begin to see your time as sacred. You stop wasting your energy on meaningless arguments, pointless scrolling, empty talk. You become mindful of what you consume, what you read, what you watch, what you say. Because you realize everything you do is being written. Everything you do is a reflection of whether you are walking toward your purpose or away from it. And the beauty of Islam is that Allah made your purpose simple: to know Him, to worship Him, to live with ihsan, excellence, in every action. When a believer loses discipline, it's usually because they've lost sight of that purpose. They've allowed dunya to cloud their heart. They start comparing their path to others. They begin to feel like life is unfair, like their struggle is too heavy. But if you pause and remember that every soul is created with a unique mission that no one else can fulfill what Allah has written for you, you begin to see your hardships differently. Every test is a training ground. Every delay is a lesson. Every loss is a reminder that your purpose is not tied to what you have, but who you are in the eyes of Allah. When Allah created you, He placed within you the strength to fulfill your purpose. You might feel weak, but your soul was designed with resilience. You might feel lost, but the Quran is your map. You might feel unworthy, but your sincerity can raise you higher than you imagine. The only thing standing between you and your purpose is the discipline to act on what you already know. You don't need more motivation. You need consistency. You don't need perfect circumstances. You need commitment. And that commitment is not to the world, it's to the King. Purpose-driven discipline looks different from worldly discipline. The world teaches you to push yourself for personal gain. Islam teaches you to push yourself for divine pleasure. The world says, do it for yourself. Faith says, do it for Allah. That shift changes everything. You start to see every act of struggle: waking up early for prayer, resisting sin, forgiving others, controlling anger as sacred acts of purpose. You stop chasing results and start seeking acceptance. You stop measuring success by how much you gain and start measuring it by how much you grow closer to Allah. You see, Purpose gives pain meaning. When you are disciplined for Allah, your sacrifices never go unnoticed. The tears you shed in secret, the temptations you resist, the silent efforts no one sees, they are all written, all valued, all rewarded. That's why the Prophet said that Allah loves the consistent deeds, even if they are small, because consistency shows purpose. It shows loyalty. It shows that you are not worshiping Allah for moments of convenience, but with devotion through all seasons of life. There's a certain peace that comes when you live with purpose. You no longer feel the need to compare. You no longer envy what others have, because you know your path is uniquely yours. You begin to see time differently. You start guarding your salah like treasure, protecting your eyes from haram like jewels, and using your voice to uplift others instead of wasting it on complaints. You begin to live with intentionality, and that intention transforms ordinary actions into acts of worship. Even a smile becomes charity. Even rest becomes gratitude. Even silence becomes remembrance. That's the beauty of living with divine purpose. Nothing is wasted. But when you lose that awareness, you drift. You start chasing things that have no weight in the akhirah. You begin to spend energy on things that will not follow you to the grave. That's the danger of living without purpose. You start living for moments that don't matter. You wake up tired not because you worked too hard, but because your soul is weary from emptiness. The heart cannot survive without meaning, and meaning only comes from knowing Allah. Every prophet who walked this earth had one thing in common. They lived with purpose. They faced rejection, mockery, and hardship, but they never gave up because their mission was clear to serve Allah and guide humanity. They were disciplined not because life was easy, but because they trusted the one who sent them. Their focus was not on results, but on obedience. That's the essence of discipline through purpose, doing your best and leaving the outcome to the King. So, the next time you feel lazy, the next time you lose motivation, don't start by asking, "How can I be more disciplined?" Ask, "Have I forgotten my purpose?" Because once you remember who you are and why you're here, your heart finds its direction again. The believer's energy comes from meaning, not from mood. And the meaning of your life is already written to serve the King of all creation with sincerity, excellence, and love. When you walk with purpose, discipline becomes your companion, and peace becomes your reward. Most people think that being undisciplined is a matter of personality or bad habits. They believe it's about laziness, lack of time, or poor motivation. But in truth, undiscipline is much deeper than that. It is a reflection of the heart. When the heart is weak, the will becomes weak. When the heart forgets Allah, the body follows its desires. And when the heart remembers Allah, the body naturally falls into order. This is why the greatest discipline is not the discipline of the body, but the discipline of the soul. Because if the heart is in submission, everything else follows. Discipline in Islam is not just about managing time or being productive. It's about being spiritually aligned. It's about recognizing that your actions, your choices, and your habits are mirrors of your inner state. You can't fix the outer world if the inner world is broken. A disciplined person is not one who has mastered schedules, but one who has mastered himself. And the only way to master yourself is to submit to the one who created you. Look at what happens when faith weakens, prayer becomes heavy, Quran feels distant, acts of obedience turn into burdens, temptations start looking beautiful, and sins begin to seem small. This is the natural consequence of a heart that has lost focus on Allah. The soul becomes restless because it has disconnected from its source. Undiscipline is not a time management problem, it is a faith management problem. It is the absence of remembrance, the absence of sincerity, the absence of humility before the King. Allah tells us in the Quran, indeed, the nafs, the self, commands to evil, except those upon whom my Lord has mercy. The nafs, our lower self, always calls us toward ease, toward indulgence, toward delay. It whispers, you can do it later, just one more hour of comfort, just one more moment of distraction. And every time you obey that voice, your spiritual strength weakens. The heart begins to lose its sharpness. It stops feeling the weight of disobedience. That's why, my brothers and sisters, undiscipline is not about failing to act, it's about failing to resist. It's about letting the self rule instead of letting Allah's command rule. If we truly understood how the heart functions, we'd spend less time trying to force external discipline and more time nurturing internal faith. When the heart is full of light, procrastination fades. When the heart is filled with purpose, consistency becomes easy. When the heart loves Allah, discipline becomes worship. Because love naturally produces obedience. You don't need to force someone who loves deeply to act. Love drives them forward effortlessly. So if you find it hard to stay consistent in prayer, in effort, in good deeds, it's not your schedule that needs fixing. It's your heart that needs remembering. Undiscipline often begins when a person loses connection with Allah through heedlessness. The Prophet said that there's a piece of flesh in the body. If it is sound, the whole body is sound. But if it is corrupted, the whole body is corrupted, and that is the heart. When the heart is diseased with pride, arrogance, or distraction, discipline dies. But when the heart is alive with hikr, with remembrance, with sincerity, the entire life becomes organized. Not because the person becomes stricter, but because the soul becomes lighter. When your heart is right, your actions fall into place. You can't wake up early for prayer if your heart has become numb to the value of that meeting with Allah. You can't control your anger if your heart doesn't remember that Allah is watching. You can't resist temptation if your heart doesn't feel the sweetness of obedience. Everything begins with the heart. The one who disciplines his heart with hikr, with with repentance, finds that discipline spilling over into every corner of his life. He becomes gentle with people, careful with time, honest with words. Not because someone is watching him, but because he knows the King is always watching. Spiritual weakness creates inconsistency because it detaches you from your why. You forget who you are serving. You forget what you are striving for. When your connection with Allah weakens, your motivation collapses. The fire that once pushed you forward becomes dim. You begin to delay good deeds, make excuses, and fall into cycles of guilt and neglect. You tell yourself, I'll do better tomorrow, but tomorrow becomes next week, and next week becomes next year. That is how undiscipline becomes a trap. It's not the body that's chained, it's the soul. To regain discipline, you must start where the problem began, with the heart. Renew your connection with Allah. Speak to Him in dua. Ask Him to purify your intentions, to strengthen your resolve, to make obedience easy and sin heavy. When you cry to Allah with sincerity, something shifts inside. You start to feel accountable again. You begin to feel seen. You stop living in autopilot mode. You realize that every moment, every decision, every breath is a test of your loyalty to the King. You see, the undisciplined person is not lazy by nature, they are distant by heart. They have allowed worldly desires to sit where Allah should sit. The more you entertain distractions, the more powerless you become against them. But the moment you fill your heart with remembrance, you regain control, because hikr is the fuel of the disciplined soul. It revives what was dying. It strengthens what was weak. It brings clarity where there was confusion. And when remembrance becomes part of your daily rhythm, your actions follow naturally. Look at the companions of the Prophet. Their strength didn't come from physical power, it came from their hearts. They were disciplined because they were devoted. They lived with balance and purpose because they never forgot who they were serving. They controlled their tongues, their time, and their temper because their hearts were filled with a man. When you live with that kind of awareness, you don't waste your life in heedlessness. You see every action as an opportunity to gain Allah's pleasure. Undiscipline thrives when you live without accountability. You tell yourself, no one will know, or it's not that serious. But a believer knows that every step, every word, every intention is being written. When you truly internalize that the King of all creation is recording your every choice, discipline becomes instinctive. You begin to hold yourself to a higher standard, not because of fear alone, but out of respect and love. That is the beauty of spiritual awareness. It creates a discipline rooted in dignity. Sometimes we think that being disciplined is about willpower alone. But willpower runs out. What sustains you is asterisk tak. What asterisk consciousness of Allah. When you live with taqwa, every moment becomes sacred. You ask yourself before every action, will this bring me closer to Allah or further away? That question alone can change your life. It can make you careful with what you eat, what you say, what you watch, how you spend your money, and how you treat people. Discipline stops being about self-improvement and becomes about spiritual excellence. Remember, Satan doesn't need to make you a sinner to destroy you. He only needs to make you distracted. If he can keep you busy with small, meaningless actions, you'll lose sight of your purpose. He wants to make you spiritually lazy because a lazy believer is a silent believer, one who doesn't grow, doesn't impact, doesn't rise. The moment you realize that undiscipline is one of his traps, you begin to fight back. You start reclaiming your focus, protecting your heart, and prioritizing Allah over comfort. You cannot serve two masters. You either serve your desires or you serve your Lord, and discipline is the bridge between those two worlds. When your heart belongs to Allah, you naturally control your impulses. You don't need the world to motivate you. You don't need applause or validation. The satisfaction of knowing that your Lord is pleased becomes enough. That's what spiritual strength looks like: quiet consistency rooted in deep awareness of Allah. So, if you find yourself struggling with discipline, don't start by punishing yourself or doubting your worth. Start by reconnecting your heart to the one who gives it strength. Fill your days with remembrance, with Quran, with dua. Surround yourself with people who remind you of Allah. Feed your soul what it needs instead of what it craves. Because when your heart becomes strong, your actions follow naturally. The body always obeys the state of the soul. Undiscipline is not the disease, it is the symptom. The disease is forgetfulness of Allah, and the cure is remembrance. Once the heart returns to its king, order returns to life. Once the soul remembers its purpose, discipline becomes effortless, because the one who truly remembers Allah can never live carelessly. True discipline begins with obedience, not with motivation, not with self-control alone, but with obedience to Allah, the one who created you, sustains you, and guides you. Because you cannot master yourself if you have not submitted yourself. You cannot live a life of order if you are rebelling against the very source of order. The root of all discipline is submission to the will of Allah, and every act of obedience is a form of training that shapes your soul, your habits, and your destiny. When you look at the commands of Allah, the 5 daily prayers, fasting, charity, guarding your tongue, being just and kind, these are not random rules. They are a divine structure designed to build your inner strength. Each command disciplines a different part of your being. Prayer disciplines your time. Fasting disciplines your desires. Charity disciplines your attachment to wealth. Lowering your gaze disciplines your heart. Speaking truth disciplines your ego. Every command of Allah is a step toward mastery of the self. But the tragedy of the human soul is that it resists obedience. The nafs, the lower self, wants freedom from restraint, from accountability, from submission. It whispers, why must I follow rules? Why can't I do what I want? And that whisper sounds appealing until you realize that what the nafs calls freedom is actually slavery to desire. True freedom doesn't come from doing whatever you wish. True freedom comes when you are liberated from being a slave to anything but Allah. Because when you obey Allah, you are no longer controlled by your impulses, by people's opinions, by emotions, or by the world. You rise above them. Obedience elevates you. Disobedience diminishes you. Every prophet who walked this earth was defined by obedience. They were disciplined, not because they were born extraordinary, but because they surrendered completely to the will of Allah. They faced unimaginable trials, yet they remained steadfast. Why? Because obedience gave them strength. The more they obeyed, the more Allah fortified them. That's the secret of obedience. When you submit, you are not weakened, you are empowered. You begin to draw strength from the one who never tires, who never fails. Look at the command of prayer. 5 times a day, Allah calls you back to Him. He doesn't need your prayer, but you need it. You need that structure, that pause, that reminder that you are not just flesh and blood, you are a soul. Every prayer trains you to say no to the demands of the world for a few minutes and say yes to your Creator. It's not just a ritual, it's an exercise in control. It's the daily discipline that keeps your heart awake. The one who guards his prayer guards his life, because when prayer becomes your anchor, everything else finds balance. And fasting, think about the depth of its discipline. You learn to control what is normally allowed. You abstain not because food and drink are bad, but because you are training yourself to obey, even when no one is watching. You prove to yourself that you are capable of restraint. You realize that you can say no to your cravings if Allah asks you to. That's the essence of spiritual discipline, controlling the permissible, so that you can easily avoid the forbidden. The commands of Allah are not restrictions. They are refinements. They purify you, polish you, strengthen you. Disobedience, on the other hand, weakens the heart. It clouds your clarity. It brings anxiety, guilt, and confusion. A single act of disobedience may seem small, but its impact on the heart is heavy. The Prophet described sin as a black dot on the heart, and each act of repentance polishes it clean. But when disobedience becomes a habit, those dots multiply until the heart becomes hardened, unable to feel, unable to be moved, unable to change. That's what undisciplined looks like at the spiritual level, a heart that no longer responds. The path to regaining discipline always begins with returning to obedience. That's why repentance, Tawbah, is so powerful. When you repent sincerely, you are not just seeking forgiveness. You are reclaiming control. You are telling your nafs, you no longer rule me. I submit only to my Lord. You start rebuilding discipline from the inside out. And Allah, in His mercy, doesn't just forgive. He helps you rise again stronger than before. That's the beauty of obedience. It humbles you, but it also heals you. One of the most beautiful things about obedience is that it doesn't just train your actions, it transforms your perspective. You begin to see life through the lens of servitude, not ego. You stop asking, "Why must I do this?" and start asking, "How can I do this better for Allah?" That shift changes everything. Your focus moves from results to sincerity, from comfort to consistency. And when you live with that mindset, every moment becomes worship. You realize that obeying Allah is not limited to rituals. It extends to how you treat people, how you speak, how you earn, how you respond to hardship. Obedience becomes a way of life, not a set of tasks. But obedience is not easy. It requires struggle, patience, and humility. You will fall and you will fail, but each time you return to Allah, He raises you higher. That's how discipline grows, not from perfection, but from persistence. The one who keeps coming back, who keeps striving, who keeps saying, "Yeah, Allah, I'm trying," will find doors opening that others can't see. Allah helps those who sincerely try to obey Him, because obedience is not about perfection. It's about intention and effort. Sometimes people think discipline means being harsh with yourself, but in Islam, discipline is rooted in mercy. Allah does not ask of you beyond your capacity. He asks you to strive within your means, to be consistent, to purify your effort. When you obey Allah, you are walking the path of mercy, because every act of obedience draws you closer to His protection. Every act of disobedience distances you from it. The disciplined believer doesn't fear hardship, because they know hardship in obedience is easier than comfort in disobedience. When you live a life of obedience, you begin to feel peace even in chaos. You find strength in patience, comfort in prayer, and purpose in every test. The world may see you as restricted, but in reality, you are the freest person alive, free from sin, free from regret, free from the chains of desire. That's the paradox of obedience. The more you submit to Allah, the more powerful you become. Because you are no longer reacting to life. You are responding with faith. You are no longer enslaved by what happens around you. You are anchored by what's happening within you. Every command of Allah is meant to shape you into the best version of yourself. Think of the discipline that comes from praying even when you're tired, from giving charity even when you have little, from forgiving even when you've been wronged. These are not small acts, they are spiritual victories. Each one breaks the ego a little more and polishes the soul a little brighter. This is why obedience is not a limitation, but a liberation. It teaches you how to live with meaning, how to stay grounded, and how to rise above the noise of the world. If you ever feel your life is chaotic, your mind restless, your habits inconsistent, don't start by reorganizing your calendar. Start by realigning your heart. Ask yourself, am I obeying Allah as I should? Because when you disobey the one who commands the universe, how can you expect your small world to be in order? But when you obey him, everything starts to fall into place. Your time gains blessing, your heart gains calmness, and your life gains direction. True discipline begins with obedience, not because obedience is easy, but because it's right. It teaches you patience, self-control, and humility. It molds you into someone who doesn't break under pressure, who doesn't lose hope in trials, and who doesn't compromise truth for comfort. Obedience to Allah is the foundation upon which all other forms of discipline are built. Without it, your efforts will always feel incomplete, but with it, your life gains a rhythm that aligns with the divine order of creation. So if you truly want to be disciplined, don't start with strategies, start with surrender. The moment you say yes to Allah and mean it with your heart, the rest of your life begins to take shape. Because the one who obeys the King of all creation never loses his way. There comes a point in every believer's journey where knowledge alone is no longer enough. You may know what is right and what is wrong, you may understand what you should do, yet you find yourself struggling to act upon it. You delay, you hesitate, you say soon, and that soon becomes years. This is where many hearts lose their strength, not because they don't believe, but because they lack the courage to translate belief into consistent action. True discipline begins when your knowledge becomes movement, when your intentions turn into habits, and when your heart learns to obey even when it doesn't feel like it. This is why faith and discipline are inseparable. You cannot separate belief from behavior. If your faith is alive, it will show in your actions. If it's weak, your discipline will crumble. Faith is the root, and discipline is the fruit. Without faith, discipline becomes mechanical. Without discipline, faith remains theoretical. The two must feed each other. The stronger your faith, the more consistent your obedience. The more consistent your obedience, the stronger your faith becomes. That is the spiritual cycle that transforms an ordinary person into someone extraordinary. Allah, in His wisdom, designed life as a field of training. Every day, every moment, every test is an opportunity to strengthen your discipline through faith. When you are tempted to give up, to fall into sin, or to surrender to laziness, it's not just a test of your willpower, it's a test of your iman. Because the heart that truly trusts Allah cannot remain undisciplined for long. It may stumble, but it returns quickly. It may fall, but it rises with humility. Faith gives you the reason, the energy, and the direction to remain steadfast. Discipline without faith feels like a burden. Discipline with faith feels like devotion. But here's the challenge: we live in a world that glorifies comfort and convenience. Everything is designed to make life easier, faster, more pleasurable. You can get what you want instantly, you can avoid discomfort effortlessly, and you can distract yourself endlessly. But that same comfort has made people spiritually weak. They can't sit in silence, They can't delay gratification. They can't bear even small hardships without complaining. Yet, the path to greatness both in this world and the next has never been paved with ease. It requires sacrifice. It requires consistency. It requires choosing the difficult path for the sake of Allah, knowing that every step you take in obedience is a step closer to eternal peace. Faith gives you the strength to choose the hard way. When your heart knows that Allah sees your struggle, that He records every effort, that He rewards every act of patience, you stop chasing ease and start chasing purpose. You no longer ask, "How can I make this easier?" You begin to ask, "How can I make this more pleasing to Allah?" That question changes everything. It changes how you work, how you worship, how you deal with pain, because the disciplined believer doesn't act based on comfort. He acts based on conviction. He doesn't pray only when he feels inspired. He prays because he knows that Allah deserves to be worshipped at all times. He doesn't fast only when it's convenient. He fasts because obedience refines the soul. Discipline becomes worship when it is driven by faith. And faith is not just about believing that Allah exists, it's about trusting His plan even when you don't understand it. It's about obeying even when the results are unseen. Sometimes Allah will place you in situations that break your rhythm, that test your patience, that demand restraint. In those moments, you will feel tired, confused, or frustrated. But that's where the discipline of faith is forged. When you choose to remain steadfast even when your heart is heavy, when you choose to stay grateful even when things go wrong, when you choose to act with integrity even when no one notices, that's when your soul grows stronger. Faith teaches you that consistency is more valuable than intensity. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You just have to keep showing up. The Prophet said that the most beloved deeds to Allah are those that are consistent, even if they are small. Why? Because consistency builds sincerity, and sincerity builds character. When you keep doing the right thing every day, your actions start shaping your heart. You begin to love what you used to struggle with. You begin to crave the discipline that once felt difficult. That is the mercy of Allah. When you persist, He transforms your effort into ease. There is a secret that many people overlook. Every act of discipline rooted in faith earns you spiritual energy. The more you obey, the more Allah strengthens your heart. The more you resist temptation, the more your willpower grows. The more you push through laziness for the sake of Allah, the more your soul awakens. Discipline without Allah exhausts you, but discipline for Allah renews you. Because you are not relying on your own strength anymore, you are relying on His. You stop saying, "I can't," and start saying, "With the help of Allah, I can." Faith-centered discipline also changes how you see failure. You realize that falling is not the end, it's part of the process. Every failure becomes a lesson in humility. Every delay becomes a training in patience. Every loss becomes a test of trust. You learn to see every difficulty as an opportunity to prove your sincerity. You no longer measure success by results, but by your effort. That's how the heart remains calm, because it knows that Allah never wastes the effort of a believer. When you tie your discipline to faith, you stop being attached to outcomes and start being attached to obedience. And this connection between faith and discipline is not limited to acts of worship. It extends to every area of life. Your work, your relationships, your studies, your goals, all of them are arenas of discipline. When you work with honesty because Allah commands it, that's faith in action. When you control your anger because you fear hurting others, that's discipline born from a man. When you fulfill your promises, when you show kindness despite irritation, when you wake up early to begin your day with remembrance, these small acts shape your soul into one that is constantly aware of Allah. One of the most dangerous habits in our time is separating religion from daily life. People think discipline is only for worship, for prayer, fasting, or charity. But in truth, every action can be an act of obedience if the intention is pure. Islam teaches you how to live, not just how to pray. When you make your daily routine a form of worship by working with sincerity, speaking truth, keeping promises, and controlling desires, then your whole life becomes an act of faith. That's when discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like purpose. Sometimes the real test of faith-based discipline is in private moments when no one is watching. When the temptation is strong and you choose restraint, that's when your iman speaks the loudest. When your heart wants to give up, but you keep striving, that's when Allah draws you closer. You may not feel it immediately, but every act of hidden obedience adds light to your heart. And when that light grows, it protects you from darkness. It guides your decisions. It gives you peace that no one else can give. The disciplined believer doesn't wait for motivation to act. They act because their heart knows its duty. They understand that life will not always feel inspiring, but Allah is always worthy of worship. They know that discipline is not about being perfect. It's about being consistent in returning to Allah again and again. Even when they fall, they rise because their faith teaches them that Allah's mercy is greater than their mistakes. That is the strength that sustains them through every test. Faith gives meaning to discipline, and discipline gives structure to faith. Together, they make a believer unstoppable, because when your faith drives your discipline, you no longer depend on the world for strength, you draw it from the divine. You find peace in perseverance, beauty in sacrifice, and joy in submission. The world may see you as restrained, but in truth you are the freest of all, free from chaos, free from weakness, free from the illusions of this temporary life. The one whose discipline flows from faith is unshakable. They walk with purpose, speak with humility, act with consistency, and trust with certainty. And when life tests them, as it always will, they remain grounded, because their strength doesn't come from the world, it comes from their Lord. True discipline is sustained not by willpower, but by worship. When faith fuels your actions, every effort becomes sacred, and every moment becomes meaningful. Because the one who disciplines his soul for the sake of Allah has already won even before reaching the destination. When you truly understand who Allah is, submission stops feeling like a burden, it becomes a privilege. The heart that bows to Allah willingly experiences a peace that no achievement, no wealth, and no worldly success can provide. You begin to realize that the purpose of your existence is not to control everything, but to surrender to the one who controls everything. And that surrender, that conscious act of saying, "Ya Allah, I trust you," becomes the foundation of true discipline. Because when the heart is aligned with the will of Allah, the rest of your life naturally falls into order. Most of our inner chaos comes from resisting what Allah has already decreed. We plan, we chase, we stress, and we complain when things don't go as we wish. But when you submit to Allah, you stop fighting His plan, you stop forcing your way through life. You begin to move with a sense of calm, because you know that whatever is written for you will reach you, and whatever isn't will never touch you. That awareness gives you incredible focus. You stop wasting time on what you can't control and start giving your full attention to what you can, your effort, your sincerity, your obedience. That's where true discipline is born, not in control, but in surrender. Submission to Allah doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean sitting and waiting for things to happen. It means you act with excellence while trusting Allah with the results. You work hard, you stay committed. You plan wisely, but your heart remains at peace even if the outcome isn't what you expected. Because you know that His wisdom is beyond your understanding. That kind of balance between striving and trusting is the essence of spiritual discipline. You do what you can, and you leave what you can't to the King of all creation. When a believer's heart reaches this state of surrender, their entire character changes. They stop rushing through life. They become patient in delay, humble in success, and calm in adversity. They develop emotional discipline, the ability to remain stable no matter what happens. You'll notice that such people are not easily shaken. They don't panic when things go wrong, nor do they become arrogant when things go right. Their peace is rooted in their connection to Allah, and that connection keeps them grounded, focused, and disciplined. One of the signs of true submission is consistency. You don't obey Allah only when it's convenient. You obey Him because He deserves it. Even when your desires push you in the opposite direction, you remind yourself that your will must bow to His. That's what true freedom looks like when your soul no longer worships its desires, but submits to its Creator. The disciplined believer wakes up for Fajr not because it's easy, but because his heart cannot sleep while disobeying his Lord. He controls his tongue not because silence is always comfortable, but because he knows that every word is recorded. He restrains his anger not because he is weak, but because he is strong enough to obey when his emotions scream otherwise. That is the beauty of surrender. It transforms every act of restraint into an act of worship. The more you surrender to Allah, the easier discipline becomes. You begin to see His mercy in every command. What once felt heavy now feels meaningful. What once felt restrictive now feels liberating. When Allah says pray, He's not burdening you, He's inviting you into peace. When He says fast, He's not depriving you, He's purifying you. When He says forgive, He's not asking you to lose, He's teaching you to rise. Every command from Allah is a pathway to your own strength, but you only realize that once you surrender. Because the soul that resists obedience sees hardship, but the soul that submits sees wisdom. And this surrender isn't only in acts of worship, it's in how you handle success and failure. When things go your way, you say Alhamdulillah not out of habit, but out of awareness that every blessing is from Him. When things fall apart, you still say Alhamdulillah because you trust that what was taken was never truly yours. This mindset makes you unbreakable. You no longer measure your worth by circumstances. Whether life gives or takes, you remain grateful, focused, and grounded. That's the discipline that comes from surrender, the discipline of the heart. Sometimes people think discipline means controlling everything: your time, your schedule, your emotions. But real discipline is deeper. It's about controlling your response to what you cannot control. It's about saying, even when life doesn't go my way, I will still act in a way that pleases Allah. You still pray, even when you're tired. You still forgive, even when you're hurt. You still give, even when you feel you have little. That kind of discipline can only come from a heart that has truly submitted to its King. If you look at the lives of those closest to Allah, the prophets, the companions, the righteous, you will see one common trait. Their hearts were completely surrendered. Their lives were filled with tests, pain, and challenges, yet they remained steadfast. Why? Because their trust in Allah was unshakable. They didn't just say, I believe. They lived it. They turned every hardship into an opportunity to prove their faith, every delay into an act of patience, every loss into an expression of gratitude. Their discipline wasn't forced. It was a natural outcome of their submission. We live in a time where everyone wants control. People want to control outcomes, people, reputations, even emotions. But the more control you try to take from life, the more anxious you become. You lose sleep over what you cannot change. You become angry at the past and fearful of the future. But once you submit to Allah, that anxiety begins to fade. You start realizing that peace doesn't come from control, it comes from trust. You don't need to control every outcome when you know that the King of all creation is already in control. You simply need to show up, give your best, and let Allah handle the rest. Surrendering to Allah also reshapes how you view time. You stop rushing. You stop comparing your timeline with others. You begin to understand that every delay, every detour, every closed door has a reason. Allah is never late. When you trust His timing, you stop forcing your destiny and start preparing for it. You work quietly, you remain patient, and you keep your heart clean. That calm focus, that stillness in the middle of uncertainty is the fruit of true surrender. When you submit to the King of all creation, you also stop needing validation from the world. You no longer act to please people, but to please Allah. You no longer need to prove yourself, because your worth is already known by the one who created you. This gives you unmatched strength. The disciplined believer doesn't depend on praise to stay consistent, nor on fear of criticism to stay humble. They act purely for Allah's sake, and that sincerity gives them a kind of quiet power that nothing can shake. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about submission is how it softens the heart. The more you surrender, the more compassion you develop. You stop reacting out of ego and start responding out of mercy. You start seeing others not as threats or obstacles, but as fellow souls struggling just like you. You forgive more easily, you love more deeply, and you judge less harshly. This emotional discipline, the ability to choose mercy over pride, is one of the greatest signs of a heart at peace with Allah's will. When your life revolves around surrendering to Allah, discipline is no longer something you force, it's something you flow with. Your priorities become clear. Your heart becomes light. You stop wasting energy on what doesn't matter and start investing it in what truly does. You wake up every day not in confusion, but in clarity. You know who you serve, why you strive, and where you're heading. That's the kind of discipline that no book, no course, and no motivational speech can teach. It's the discipline born from submission to the one who owns your soul. And that is the ultimate secret of peace and success. The one who submits to Allah doesn't lose control, they gain it. Because when you align your life with His will, you stop being a slave to chaos, to fear, to temptation, to people's opinions. You become a servant of the King, and that is the highest honor a soul can ever achieve. The one who truly submits to Allah doesn't need to chase order, chases them.